What fascinates people about abandoned places is that inherent curiosity that we have to look inside a place that we've never seen before, to revisit something from history, and to see the beauty of something in the act of destruction. The initial spark of starting to photograph abandoned places began in 2011 when I had bought a new camera. I find the architecture very interesting, the darkness of them. I am interested in the history of the places that I photograph. I compare it to a portrait of an older person. They have wrinkles, they're not perfect, and they have gray hair. But to me, it shows you can see the history of a place in the photographs that no one has seen in 30 years. People see these places as modern ruins. They're used to driving by every day. It's not a place that they would ever go into as a local person, but to see it now in a decayed version of itself, a vacation schedule hanging on a wall, to see a coffee mug that was left behind, to see a typewriter that isn't used anymore that's still uncovered, and to see a roof caved in and the floor cracking underneath you, there is a sadness to it, but there's also something beautiful about it. Other people see it as a piece of history that they are witnessing.
My name is Jake Williams. I do online short documentaries on abandoned places, and I go to explore different places in the United States. When a person explores an abandoned building for the first time, or any time really, emotionally you have this sense of adventure throughout the entire thing. When you're in something like this, it's not only creepy, which I think is an aspect too. A lot of people like the thrill and the spookiness of an abandoned building, but I think people also appreciate the history and the nostalgia behind it. It's fun to piece together what this could have been or what this was. And the more you explore a building and the more you to find certain relics inside, it really ties together this sense of history. And I think for me personally, and for a lot of people, that sense of history is a huge pull as to why people explore buildings.
This was the economic driver of this region for 100 plus years. To know that people were making their living, creating a new life, building their families in places like this, it's powerful. It is urban archaeology. But then to see what happens after that, how nature comes in, how time changes things, there's really nothing more special than to feel like you're walking in and you've discovered this place. So where we are, Kerry Furnaces number 6 and 7, they're National Historic Landmarks, and they operated from 1907 until 1978. But they made iron on this site from 1884 until 1982.
I started here at Kerry Furnace in 1964, right out of high school. When I first got here, I was amazed at how the people function and work. The main function of the Kerry Furnaces was to take the raw material to make the cast iron for different functions throughout the United States.
And that steel went out and literally built America's 20th century.
It was at first very scary because it was an industrial place. You didn't know what was going to happen, how things were going to go for you. When I worked here, it was noisy everywhere you went. On the furnaces, sometimes you couldn't even hear yourself talk. It was so noisy. We really were a very good team. In 82, 83, the mill shut down. You had 250, 300,000 men looking for whatever job they could find.
We begin as an organization at that same time, we being Rivers of Steel. Our premise was this, that if you tear it all down, you're taking away not just our history, but our ability to use that history to drive economic revitalization in this region. We start fighting for this site in 1988. We get total control of the site in 2010 and have been doing tours and other events since. So that period between 1988 and really 2010, this site stands dormant and it transforms and becomes a site of wonder, becomes a place for people to come in and explore. You know, these are the American ruins. We would be doing a disservice to history if we pretend that in the last 30 years of deindustrialization in this region didn't exist. People don't want a sanitized site. They want to be able to see the old and the new. But in this site, we do the industrial tour, where folks come and really walk through the process. They go all the way around the perimeter of the site. They come up through the stove deck and into the cast house.
Now that Rivers of Steel started their organization, been given tours ever since that, and I enjoy it very much. It's amazing. People come in from all over the world. I try to tell them how we worked, what we did, how we unloaded the cars, how the wintertime was here. Surprisingly, quite a few people would be coming through here and say, my father worked here, or my grandfather worked here. And if I worked with them, I'd tell them how well they worked, or how we got along, or what their father or grandfather did.
Well, all throughout the site, there are a number of different pieces of artwork that are there, some of which were sanctioned, some not. We started working with graffiti artists. We set aside legal wall spaces for them and said, you're allowed to paint here. You have absolutely beautiful pieces of work, but the big thing that happens is the Kerry deer. Okay? It is a sculpture that was built as a guerrilla art project in 1997 and 98 by a group of local artists known as the Industrial Arts Co-op. And over the course of a year, built this giant sculpture made entirely out of materials found on site. In mythology, deer often symbolize rebirth, and this is their way to honor that. There's a great piece that is seen by almost everybody that comes on tour, and it's an old piano. That piano came with my house, and we put it down there, and it's just my piano. So here it is. It's important to preserve these places because they add meaning. They define who we are.
It needs to show how the men worked and suffered in places like this to keep America running. And now that they're gone, we don't have too many furnaces and blast furnaces left in this country.
Too often, we're very quick to tear down, to bulldoze, to wipe it away, sanitize and homogenize. But sites like this give us character and define us. Because again, if you take it all away, tear it all down, and you build a Walmart, what do you got? This place stands as a monument not just to the workers in this region, but to the industry and what this region built, what it did for this country, and what it did for the world.
Eckley is a unique place. There isn't another place like it in the country. Eckley Miners Village is a town that was built in the 1850s, and there were literally hundreds of towns like this throughout northeast Pennsylvania. It was founded on some of the richest anthracite veins in the world at a time when America's industry and economy were growing very rapidly. This is where first the Irish came, and then Southern and Eastern Europeans came, and then they assimilated into society. I mean, they became Americans starting at a place like Eckley. It's an opportunity to really tell labor history, tell ethnic history, immigration history, as well as social history, and even history of poverty as well. You know, these are some of the lowest rung people that lived here, that came here, you know, with almost nothing, and then built a life here. So it's an important part of American history. In 1968, the film company Paramount Pictures rented the site from the mine owner at the time to film the movie The Molly Maguires. They put dirt on the roads, they buried the telephone lines and power lines, they reclad all of the houses and essentially recreated an 1870s setting here at Eckley. However, after the filming wrapped, there were people in a community group and an economic development group that decided that we've got such a great resource right now that they're going to buy the village from the mine owner and then donate it to the state as a historic site. Today we have over 200 structures still standing on the site. And they range from 2 churches to the doctor's office, and then there's 3 structures that were built by Paramount during the filming of The Molly Maguires. So the breaker that you see behind me, the company store building, and then there was a small mule barn that are still standing as well. So it was important for us and important for the people in the 1970s to leave the breaker here to sort of identify this place as a patch town.
When the dark of the night meets the neon light, I will find you. It doesn't matter what you say or what you do. I'm behind you. Go on, run if you want to, hun. Nobody will be saving you. In love and war, who's been keeping score? I have been. Now I'm a has-been in my own time. Get in line. In the shadow of a coal mine. In the shadow of a coal mine.
In thinking about the idea of abandonment in a place like Eckley, on an afternoon like today, even though it's beautiful, there might be 1 or 2 people here. Well, at its height, there might have been 1,500 people walking around here. People living in each of these houses. You've got kids running around. You've got a lot of noise coming from the industrial area. So there is a stark contrast between what this place felt like, looked like, sounded like, and the way it is now. I mean, for me personally, that aesthetic is very interesting, and it may be even shocking in some ways too. When the state took over in the 1970s, there were still about 100 people that lived in the village. But today we still have 5 houses that are at least the residents. And it's important because we're continuing the tradition that was started in 1854, and we're still maintaining that. We're not so much a technology museum or a mining museum as we are a sort of a social history and family museum. This is about the lives of the miners, their wives and their kids, and the people that actually lived here and functioned in the village. We're not a ghost town, we're a historic site. We are talking about a way of life that doesn't really exist anymore.
Come on down if you want to, hun. I have been. Now I'm a has-been in my own time. Get in line. In the shadow of a coal mine. In the shadow of a coal mine.
All right, yeah, we're gonna go right here over the hill. Just up this way here. Down the other side. And here we are, Graffiti Highway. Centralia was a town in the coal region of Pennsylvania. In 1962, the coal seam below the town was set on fire. The fire company was sent out to the town dump to light the trash on fire. When they did that, the fire burned down and hit a coal seam that was exposed on the ground level, and that caused the coal seam below town to catch fire. By 1990, the town's population had dropped to under 100. Eventually, it was decided that people who lived here could stay in their homes if they wanted to. But when they died, the state took ownership of their home. So today, there are fewer than 10 people that still live in Centralia. If you drive around town, you'll see curbs and sidewalks and even steps that lead to nowhere. It's estimated that there's somewhere between 100 and 150 years more worth of coal in the seam to continue burning the fire for, another century. Occasionally, you can still see smoke rising from the ground from the fire below, though as the years gone by, the smoke appears less and less frequently as the fire moves further and further underground. Right now, we're walking on what's become known as Graffiti Highway. It was originally Pennsylvania Route 42. The fire underneath was causing too much damage to the road, thus leaving a stretch of about a mile of roadway abandoned. So this here is kind of one of the most famous aspects here in Centralia. This is a large crack in the road. It was caused completely by the mine fire below ground, burning away at the coal. If you look behind me here, you can see how the road's buckling and cracked, and all the damage that you see has been caused because of the mine fire burning below ground and causing damage like this over the years. There's people that are alive today that grew up and spent their childhood in Centralia, and to sort of imagine that and then to see it without it being there anymore, I think really just makes it a fascinating place to visit when you think about the stories and you think about what used to be here.
My entire family were coal miners. I grew up going down in what we call a hole with a lot of my uncles, listening to the stories from what they call the patch towns and watching them blast with dynamite and dig coal out and everything associated with the mining industry. Pioneer Tunnel is unique in the context that it's a different type of mining. Mining for over 200 years has supplied the heating needs for the entire United States. The actual mining in this area here was the main source of coal for the Civil War Union Navy. Over the period from 1870 to the present day, 35,120 men and boys were killed in mining accidents. It was a hard employment, and when they found the anthracite coal being so abundant in this general area, that's why it took off. The Pioneer Tunnel is located on the mountain a little bit north of Ashland and was operated from 1911 until 1932. The mine was closed down due to the Great Depression, and it was left identical to the way it looked when they reopened it in 1962 as a tourist attraction. Preserving the Pioneer Tunnel, it is needed for people to see how people originally spent their lives in maintaining this. There's only 3 mines that you can actually go into in the eastern part of the United States. We here at Pioneer like to take the tourists down to be able to see what it was actually like for the miners, but yet you get to see the actual locations where the coal was taken out of the veins of coal within the mine. Our mine cars that we take the tourists in are actual built-up old mine cars that were actually used in the mine, but we have converted them into a passenger car. Stop. Instead of hauling coal, we haul tourists. Anthracite coal, extremely difficult to mine in a lot of ways. What would happen after we drilled a series of holes, when you would yell the fire in the hole 3 times, then you would hear. Did you count them all? I think there is a lot of curiosity within this coal mine. Who's in there? Is it spooky? Is there ghosts? Is it dangerous? Will I get claustrophobic? When you bring the people out and they talk to you afterwards and they state, wow, I never knew that's how it was done. I never knew how hard that would be. I never knew what it looked like in a mine. So it brings the person to be able to experience a live, living, working coal mine as the way it was at that time.
Well, I went down to the coal mine. I went down to the coal mine, begging for them answers some old few had found before. Well, I should have known what that old mine might have in store.
I give tours primarily because I want to keep it alive. There's always an appeal to something that was and is no longer there. And to see something that you're going to see only in a book and actually go to it and be part of it is an appeal, I think, to a lot of people. My family suffered in the mines. My family worked hard in the mines. My family spent their entire lives in the mines. And it's very important to me to let people know how these people lived and what sacrifices they gave and the hard work that they did, but also what they did for this country.
Visitors really respond to that sense of a ruin. Americans don't have a lot of ruins. We don't leave a lot of these buildings around. And so when people walk around here, our visitors really respond to that sense of a place that is so filled with stories, but is so quiet and is so abandoned today. Eastern State Penitentiary is an abandoned prison here in Philadelphia. In 1829, didn't close until 1971. So the prison spans almost all of American history. It changed the way that people think about prisons all over the world. Eastern State Penitentiary is the world's first true penitentiary. And so the people who built this prison believed that every last person knows right from wrong, and if they spend enough time in isolation and silence, they would look into their hearts and become remorseful. Prisoners spent 23 hours a day in their own private cell. The officers wore socks over their shoes. The walls are about 18 inches thick of masonry between the cells. They should have never seen another prisoner while they were inside this building. Famously, Charles Dickens devoted a whole chapter of his book about America to Eastern State Penitentiary. He said, "I hold this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body." Eventually, the critics won out, and they gave up solitary confinement in 1913, so these hallways around us filled with prisoners packed in a relatively small space. It was outdated, outmoded. It was designed for solitary confinement. It wasn't safe.
So Eastern State Penitentiary was closed by the state in 1970, and the big walls just basically hid what was going on inside the prison. Water came in through the ground because an urban forest had grown in here over 20 years.
And it became like a Mayan ruin in the jungles. The city was considering building a shopping mall or condominiums in here. A group of Philadelphians gathered and made the argument that the building should be opened as an historic site, which finally happened in 1994. And we've been open ever since.
I think people in the beginning were very skeptical that it could be a viable tourist destination. The first year we had 11,000 people. The second year we had 22,000 people. People were really seeing it as a fascinating, authentic place to visit.
Today we're in the second wave of Eastern State being a tourist attraction. When it opened, you could literally buy a ticket and tour the cell blocks, and there are people here. Today we offer an audio tour narrated by Steve Buscemi from Boardwalk Empire. Visitors can walk through the site. We have artist installations that are about the building's history, and this building is so beautiful. And so strange and so surprising. It's like you're an archaeologist without a shovel, kind of piecing together the stories and the use of this building. You can walk through 150 years of correctional theory just by walking through Eastern State Penitentiary. The outside is meant to intimidate, it's meant to deter crime because it's so scary looking. But here on the inside, they built something that looks like a church. Eastern State Penitentiary is designed on a wagon wheel floor plan, and that design was copied all over the world. Because you can stand in the center and turn around and see down every corridor. It's a place where you can keep track of whatever's happening in the building, you can see it from one spot.
So there are some places here that we've chosen to let them keep deteriorating. We call this a stabilized ruin, which means that we're keeping it in the state that it appears today.
People responded to the fact that it wasn't all fixed up and that it is in a state of ruin.
The thing about this building that fascinates me is all of the lives that were here, from the people who built this to all the people that lived here.
It's funny because one of the biggest challenges of running tours here is to bring the voices of the prisoners back and the voices of the officers back into the building. We try to tell the stories and bring to life the people who once lived in these cells and the people who once worked in these corridors.
It's been known and it's been shown, the streets are full of wolves that moan as the wall come tumbling down, as the last Humpty loses his crown.
When people come in here as visitors, I hope that they think about the fact that this huge building was built on an idea to improve people's lives. That process of incarcerating people didn't really work, so then the prison just stayed open for many years, changing with the outside influences of criminal justice issues. But today we're faced with a mass incarceration phenomenon.
It's become the central part of our mission to compare today's criminal justice system to how we got here.
And can this place that was built with lofty ideals be a good place to have that discussion? We believe it is. We think it's the best place to have that discussion.
A lot of these abandoned buildings tell the story of people who are also themselves kind of forgotten. Eastern State is filled with people whose names are forgotten, many of them poor, recent immigrants, often in really desperate circumstances, and it tells a whole other side of American history. The reason that the building was abandoned is because the people who lived there were themselves often forgotten. And that's our job here, is to try to tell the stories of these people who've been forgotten in this building that was also for a long time forgotten.
Take me away from here. I'm not the one they want, my dear, even though everyone I know is telling me to hold on. It's been tried, it's been true. It's been a long time coming for you, with all that this world has to offer just seems to bother